great to be back in Cork, and as always, I'm deeply grateful to Jim and Penny for their hospitality, for their solidarity, and for their support of my scholarly work and activism along the years. And I'm also very thankful to the University College Cork for the hospitality that they've provided me with. I'm going today to talk about the phenomenon in Israeli politics that whenever there is a feeling that the society, the Jewish society, is to fall apart because of racial tensions between Jews of color like myself, who are the majority, and the Ashkenazi or the European Jewish elite, for some odd reason, there is a war or yet another bloodletting cycle, be it against Lebanon, be it against the Palestinians. Arab non-Jews pay the price for what we call in Israel, or in Hebrew, Am Echad Lev Echad, which is one people, one heart. So everyone is united as the last frontier of Jewish civility in the Middle East, or as we call it, Villa in the jungle. And all of the social tensions that are to make the society fall apart disappear. When they reappear, there will be another war. So I'm going to start with my argument about the three reasons for the heinous Israeli carnage in Gaza. But then I'm going to go back in history to the materials of the book, and I would be very glad to entertain discussion after that on the relationship between these materials that I'm going to read you from and the recent Gaza carnage. So before I do that, I want to say that there is a translation block between Hebrew and English. And there is a very limited view, which is usually along the nationalistic binary, Israel-Palestine, that you get in English because it's easy to digest. It's not nuanced. Most Israelis don't think that the Gaza carnage had to do only with trying to disrupt the coalition between Hamas and Fatah. There were two other reasons that comes from this one people, one heart, that had a lot to do with the war, its magnitude, and particularly its timing. Usually, anti-social laws in the kind of Reaganomics or Thatcherism are being voted in the wee hours by the Knesset anytime between January and May, and they get into effect in June. And people go demonstrate in the streets July and August because the kids are out of school, you go, you build a tent, you kind of do a camping kind of demonstration like Occupy 2011, for example, and the police is not likely to be very brutal because of children, or so they think. And usually these kind of protests tackle the foundation of racism within Jews in Israel. So, Israel used the Gaza war and this whole notion of one people, one heart to cut 1.5 billion from whatever has been left of the welfare state. Most of it has gone to the military-industrial complex. And as is, the income gap in Israel is the highest among the OECD countries, and it's even higher, among Jews, let alone Palestinians, it's even higher than black-white, the average black-white income gap in the States. So first they did this budget cut that my book also discusses, and another thing is they wanted to preempt the summer demonstration before it would even start. They have informers in many of the community groups. The 2011 summer demonstration was mainly by nice Ashkenazi, childless, well-to-do kids. This summer, it was to be very violent. People said that they're going to blow up with these gas canisters. I don't know how you call them, these gas things that give gas to people's kitchens. They were going to fortify themselves. Some people even talked about using weapons. Right before the current started, during the 18 days of this mysterious disappearance or kidnap of these 3 boys, it's very interesting to know that the tape recordings or the voice recordings from these 3 kids' cell phones demonstrated very clearly that they died within 24 hours of the kidnap. However, Netanyahu very cynically waited for 18 days. He sent the mothers of these kids that he knew they were dead to Geneva to plead for their kids' lives. All the while, lower class, mainly Jews of color neighborhoods were demolished in Tel Aviv to make room for development and gentrification, which I'll talk about later. So the summer protest was to be very violent, and the best way to preempt any kind of civil unrest in Israel is to start a war. The end result? The Palestinians pay. And this time they pay the highest price since the Nakba. And most Israelis are convinced that it had a lot to do with Israel in intra-Jewish politics. So basically, this is my argument about Gaza. Now we're going to go back in time to another social protest that in my book I chronicle kind of in piecemeal. And that's the protest by Vicky Knafel, the woman holding the flag of Israel. And that was like the introduction to all of these Israeli fascist flaggings that you probably saw on the news, of Israelis supporting the Israeli army, supporting the war, which is in a sense also a ploy of the elite to create national unity among the lumpen proletariat, the lower middle class, so that the social problems are kind of like nullified. So Vicky Knafel was 43 years old, and on July 2nd, 2003, she started marching on Jerusalem. She was a single mother of 3. She wore a black baseball cap, and she wrapped herself in the Israeli flag. Her 205-kilometer pilgrimage ascended to the capital from Mitzpeh Ramon, a remote desert town in one of Israel's highest that has one of Israel's highest unemployment rates. Ahoti, which is a Mizrahi feminist NGO that I am one of the co-founders of, they joined Vicky, they protected her from police harassment, and they brought her story to the press. Dozens of unemployed and underemployed single moms from Israel's Mizrahi slums saw Vicky on TV and started their own march on Jerusalem. The moms arrived in Jerusalem on the evening of July 9th and stayed there until the end of August 2003. Like all grassroots Mizrahi protests in Israel, the Knafel protest was doomed to fail. These protests always fail for the same reasons. First, the global public knows Israel through the 2 dominant binarisms that are available for international public consumption. One is a Jewish state versus its Arab neighboring enemy states, and the other is the Israel-Palestine conflict. The only way that the Israeli state might change its policies is through media-driven pressure that will lead to international sanctions. The international media, however, usually largely ignores stories like the Knafel protest, and the Hebrew media narrates them as isolated freak shows. The second reason for the failure of Mizrahi protest is the desire of Mizrahim to belong in the mainstream, defined by the 30% Ashkenazi minority. Mizrahim are 50% of Israel's citizenry. Mizrahim means Oriental or Shakiyin in Arabic, or Easterners. And they strive to enter the mainstream to gain improved housing, schools, job opportunities, and healthcare. mainstream Mizrahim self-censor discrimination and humiliation in favor of what Chicano Gomez Peña called brown-skinned gringos. For the sake of intra-Jewish unity, the raison d'etre of the Jewish state's survival in Palestine, the Ashkenazi mainstream judges anyone discussing intra-Jewish race relations as guilty of lehitbachyen, or its Hebrew for whining and being a crybaby. Additionally, there are two more reasons. One of them is that the Mizrahi protests are doomed to fail because the protesters themselves are entrapped by the lethal webs of state bureaucracy. Try to demonstrate in Israel or to be a community organizer. They'll find all traffic tickets against you. They'll find a check that bounced 4 years ago, and they'll take you to collection court. Or after I came from Italy and I was in a panel with Mahmoud Darwish, I was arrested at the Ben Gurion airport because 2 years before, my dog, that by then was dead, did a 3 millimeter hole in someone's fence, and therefore I violated a law of having my pet behave properly in public space. So, the moment you try to be a social organizer, they operate the state bureaucracy with its lethal webs, so you're busy taking all of these fires and you cannot organize anything. And the other, which is the most important one, is that the Mizrahi protesters are not able to break the bonds that connect them and their love to Israel, the Jewish state, and the somatic pain that the state bureaucracy apparatus inflicts upon them. So now I want to talk a little bit about this arrangement law, or Chok HaEsderim, the one that, as the war was going on, all of the ministers, the ones who didn't take a vacation in Europe, and the Knesset members who didn't take a vacation in Europe, found time in the wee hours to go and vote $1.5 billion shekels budget cuts and transfer the money from welfare, health, etc. to the military-industrial complex. So on 29 June 2003, an amendment to Chok HaEsderim, or Hebrew arrangement law, slashed the single mother's welfare allowance. Chok HaEsderim is an extreme Reaganomics-type initiative to deregulate government, reduce public spending, decrease upper-class taxation, and ease inflation through monetary control. In June 2003, the National Security Bureau, or NSB, mailed single moms notices about slashing their monthly income assurances, income augmentation, and rent aid. The notices also informed them about the moms' retroactive debts to the NSB incurred between January, when the 2003 amendment entered into law, and June, when the enforcement started. Vicky marched because she could no longer pay her bills. Her half-time job paid her 1,217 new Israeli shekels, or something, or NIS, something which was those days about 280 American dollars a month. Before the 2003 amendments, she received the welfare income augmentation of 1,983 NIS, which was around $456. The amendment reduced her augmentation to 679 NIS, which was around $156. With this budget cut, she is very likely to get something like $40, no more. And at any rate, this amount was swallowed up by her retroactive debt, reducing her welfare to nothing. I know Vicky's situation intimately because I too was a single mom on welfare. Because I've never been a Zionist, I'm not allowed to hold any job with gainful income in Israel. Not only because I'm not a Zionist, but because I'm not a Zionist and a Mizrahi from the majority, and they do not want me to be a role model for other Mizrahim to become non-Zionists. But unlike Vicky, I had access to privilege because I have a Berkeley PhD. Now I want to talk about one of the mothers of all these evils, which is the Oslo Peace Agreement, and I'll talk about Oslo economics and the Hudna. The severe budget cuts of Chok HaEsderim were not supposed to happen after Israel and the Palestinian Authority, or the PA, signed the Oslo Agreement Accord in 1993. The Israeli peace architects, upper-class Ashkenazi politicians and entrepreneurs, promised an economic boom for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Instead, they worked in concert with the affluent PLO Tunis leadership to break up labor unions and do away with sustained salaried work as they cut financial deals with each other for their own benefits. Factories in Israel closed and moved to places like Jordan and Honduras. This left no jobs for working-class Mizrahim and Palestinians with Israeli citizenship. The Palestinians of the West Bank and Gaza were hit by unemployment as well. Third-world guest workers were cheaper for Israeli employers. Unchecked Zionist settlement expansion and the stillborn PA economy caused civil unrest with the West Bank and the Gaza Palestinians. No wonder the Second Al-Aqsa Intifada broke out in October 2000. Israeli troops and tanks once again waged war on Palestinian civilians, who responded with increased suicide bombing. The Intifada continued until the Hudna ceasefire was declared on 29 June 2003, the same day the Chok HaEsderim Amendment took effect. The IDF pulled back from the centers of Palestinian towns and villages. No suicide bombing meant no grand guignol for the foreign press corps, so they followed the Knafuland story instead. So I will start by telling you how the Knafuland protest ended, with a suicide bombing, of course, which got again this whole thing of one people, one heart. And the suicide bombing, according to testimonies I collected, was pretty much probably orchestrated. So I want to read you from the last chapter of the book first. The Knafu struggle ended the day after the conversation with Ilana. Ilana is a woman with the son in the wheelchair, about the Israeli regime's ethnic cleansing of Mizrahi single mothers. On the evening of 19 August 2003, a Palestinian suicide bomber, dressed as an Orthodox Jew, carried an explosive device aboard bus number 2 from the Western Wall into Jewish Jerusalem. The device detonated just past Peace Road number 1, at the American Colony Hotel Crossroad, the old 67 border between Palestinian Jerusalem and Mizrahi Jerusalem, 300 meters away from my granny's house. 23 people died. Over 130 were injured. Most of the casualties were ultra-Orthodox Jews. One Filipino domestic worker also died. This ended the Hudna that I was just talking about between Israel and the Hamas. Before the bombing, the national and international media whiled away the uneventful days of the Hudna in their own encampment near Knafuland. When their beepers, cell phones, and two-way radio buzzed with news of the bombing, they all leapt up in unison. In a press corps caravan, they sped across town to cover the carnage at the border. Afterwards, they went to the American Colony Hotel bar to get drunk. So did I. With my converted food coupons to purchase a drink, I would nurse for hours, and my California English to gather information. Forever the anthropologist, forever collecting data. Without media coverage, the socialites, or the social worker caseworkers, took advantage. They offered mothers minimal incentives to leave and reminded them that if their children were not in school come 1st September, they'd be reported as delinquents to the youth and family courts. The judges could then order the removal of the children from their homes to be forcibly placed into boarding schools. The plight of the single mothers was completely off the public agenda in favor of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Most mothers left the encampment within a few days of the bombing. Only Vicky and a few diehards stayed until 23rd September 2003, when Vicky herself departed. For Jewish New Year, let me see. I have a suicide bombing picture. There it is. For Jewish New Year 2004, Vicky Knappel, strapped for cage, posed nude for an Israel porn website. For this photo op, she had written on her breasts, "The state milks single mothers." Later, she sued the owners of the site because they didn't pay her what they promised. On the eve of Jewish New Year 2005, Vicky's son committed suicide. Right after Jewish New Year 2006, Vicky joined the Meretz Party, the predominantly Ashkenazi, left-leaning Land for Peace party, and started giving speeches about peace. Shortly thereafter, she completely disappeared from the public sphere. From 2006 until January 2009, Bibi Netanyahu, head of Likud, led the Knesset's parliamentary opposition. Between 27 December 2008 and 18 January 2009, the IDF conducted Operation Cat Led. Its name was borrowed from a lyric about the miracle of Hanukkah, written by Chaim Nachman Bialik, Israel's national poet. "My teacher gave me a dreidel cast from solid lead," Bialik wrote, to the tune of an Ashkenazi folk song. In Arabic, Operation Cat Led is referred to as the Gaza carnage. The operation involved a massive 3-week bombing and invasion of the densely populated Gaza Strip. This was prime scheduling, as the United States would be deep in President George W. Bush's lame duck period after the November 2008 elections and before the January 2009 inauguration of Barack H. Obama. On February 20, 2009, after parliamentary elections, President Shimon Peres followed procedure and appointed Bibi Prime Minister to form a new government on the Mizrahi vote. Yet again, I will explain later why the Mizrahim vote for the right. On 21 February 2005, I attended a convening of Israel's Women's Parliament. The day's topic was minimum wage, a woman's perspective. One of the speakers was Dr. Linda Efroni, a brilliant Iraqi economist and labor attorney. She is a prominent consultant for Israel's major labor unions on issues concerning income and work conditions, and a member of the Israeli Council of Higher Education. At the time, she also had a weekly opinion column in Globes, Israel's business news. Yet, she has only been an adjunct at Tel Aviv University. In the discussion after the speeches, she told the following story. Around 2001, I was invited by the Israeli College of National Security, where military officers are groomed to become generals, to give a lecture at Haifa University. Haifa University regularly hosts events of the college. The audience was made up of students in the special program, but also senior members of the Shabak, Israel's secret police, military intelligence, the Israeli police force, and other senior officials in the national security apparatus. There were about 40 people, sitting around a large conference table. This was around the time of the social unrest following the collapse of the Argentinian economy. They wanted to know if similar unrest was possible in Israel because of socio-economic gaps, and how these gaps would be minimized. I offered my analysis. We have problems with security in these borders. These transcend socio-economic protests. It would take nothing less than a miracle for any social protest to succeed. If social unrest appeared in the news, I would not be surprised to hear about Hezbollah Katyusha's rockets falling on Kiryat Shmona the next day. This would immediately shift public discourse back to security. I could not rule out that the Katyushas on Kiryat Shmona were a response to the IDF Air Force provocation of their fighter jets crossing the borders deep into Lebanon. I told them that I didn't have the knowledge, but my intuition as an analyst told me that. Everyone was quiet. Everyone was quiet. No one said a thing. And then we broke for a buffet lunch. At the buffet, a corpulent man, approached me. He said, "Shalom, my name is XY. I used to be the media advisor for the Minister of Defense." And this is exactly what we did. On 9 October 2010, I called Dr. Efroni from Minneapolis to verify the quote. She said, "Yes, this is exactly what I said, and this is what he said." He didn't say that it was off the record. As for Vicky and the end of the Hudna, I was in a meeting with Bibi in Jerusalem. She wanted me to join her. The man was very stressed. He sweated a lot. Very stressed. In hindsight, even in the finance ministry, they didn't believe it was going to be so easy. Chok HaHesderim nullifies out the legislator. Israel is not a democracy. In the 2003 amendment, they saved 5 billion NIS. They transferred the money to the upper echelons in the form of a tax refund, like they did partially now with $1.5 billion shekels. They could have done other things with this money. They were so surprised at how easy the transfer was. I think it's not impossible that they let the suicide bomber slip through. Now I'm going to talk about Occupy 2011 and show you how this script of social protest ending up in suicide bombing and the whole phenomenon of one people, one heart repeats itself. In summer 2011, tens of thousands of young Israelis priced out of the rental leases or foreclosed upon protested the state slashing of public services, echoing the single mother's protest of 2003, but on a larger scale. The protesters refer to this as Tel Aviv Tahrir. Oh, missing the photo. Okay. Tel Aviv Tahrir, after the Tahrir Square demonstrations in Cairo, Egypt, that toppled Hosni Mubarak's neoliberal regime. How can we turn this up?
Apologies to you, I have to leave. This family thousand, okay?
Okay.
Can I see this online? Is this online?
Yeah, we'll put it online. Yeah.
Thank you very much. My apologies.
So they refer to it as Tel Aviv Tahrir after the Tahrir Square demonstrations in Cairo, Egypt, that toppled Hosni Mubarak's neoliberal regime. Unlike in the Knafo protests, the leaders and spokespeople of summer 2011 were Zionist, left Ashkenazim, even though young Mizrahim composed the majority of the protesters, reflecting Israel's demographics. The leaders were mostly single, from affluent families, and received preferential treatment from the authorities. Thus, the regime could not threaten them with the forced boarding of their children due to poverty. 48 Arabs largely avoided participation despite quoting from the protest leadership, using their common Israeli citizenship as grounds to join. Most criticized the protests for not clearly addressing the connections between Israel's economic troubles and the cost of the military occupation and civic Jewish settlements in the West Bank. Their protest leadership strategy was to avoid any mention of Palestine, to reach consensus between all sectors of Israel's secular and religiously observant majority Jewish citizenry. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Hasbara and the Jewish diaspora went into action. It showcased the protest as an act of Jewish unity and Israeli democracy, even though the demonstrations were against the government. It was part of the Nicer Face of Israel campaign, aimed at Jewish communities and media outlets in Western Europe and North America. Thanks to a lull in the Israel-Palestine conflict in summer 2011, exactly like the lull that was in the Knafo protest, exactly like the lull that was before the kidnap of the 3 boys. In the recent Gaza carnage, the protest succeeded in getting international media attention. On 18 August 2011, Egyptian Bedouin guerrillas from the South Sinai committed a suicide attack on an Israeli bus near Eilat. This prompted the IDF to bombard Palestinian civilian populations in Gaza, 260 kilometers north of where the bus attack took place. Hamas responded by bombarding civilian Jewish populations near Gaza. The Israeli regime used this attack to divert attention from the protest. Major mainstream Hebrew media outlets reported that the Shabak and the IDF had intelligence on the date, time, and place the bombing would occur. Netanyahu instructed them to keep quiet when the Knesset inquired about their lack of preventive measures. At the 27 January 2012 dinner for the World Economic Forum annual meeting in Davos, Switzerland, Israeli Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Defense Ehud Barak delivered a speech on the prospect of an Israeli attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. In the same speech, he referred to the social protest. Quote, "If the government will not respond to the protest, it will return with force and violence." End quote. The fact that these two subjects appeared side by side in Barak's speech were unnoticed by the international media. The media also overlooked the prescience of Barak's statements. In summer 2012, the Occupy-style protesters from summer 2011 attempted to reinvigorate their movement against the ever-increasing rent, food, and gas prices, coupled with the privatization of social services. Following the model of Mohammed Bouazizi, the Tunisian vendor whose self-immolation sparked the Arab Spring of 2011, Moshe Silman, a middle-class, middle-aged Ashkenazi, became distraught even enough to light himself on fire in the middle of a public demonstration in Tel Aviv. On the verge of homelessness, he joined the protest movement after losing his business and home to Israel's collection court. He was refused public housing and could not provide for himself on the shoddy NSB disability allowance. Others followed suit, but did not get the international media attention that Silman got. They were Mizrahim, isolated freak shows, at least in the eyes of the mainstream media. Instead, the media concentrated on stories proclaiming increased Israel-Iran tensions. Both Barak and Netanyahu publicly pressed the importance of Israeli national unity against the Muslim Goyim threat. Just like the Palestinian suicide bomber in 2003 that dissipated the Nakba movement. So I hope you see the connection here. Netanyahu said to the media that Israeli intelligence managed to catch groups of Palestinian guerrillas before kidnapping Israeli settlers, about a dozen times. The question, why right when the summer protest approached? The very efficient Mukhabarat, or secret service with its nets of informers, failed to recognize this one and have these 3 boys kidnapped, which started the whole Gaza carnage. Well, I'd like to read you another part of the book, if I may, that deals with the reasons for Israeli Mizrahi fascism and the way that it actually has to do with the privilege of supposed pro-Palestinian politics of the Israeli Zionist socialist. So this part is from a chapter where I write about,
I had a question, because I followed some of this. Is there any question that the 3 teens could have been killed by, say, Mossad?
No. They were killed by Palestinians.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's a very atrocious act, which I do not support. My question is, how come Israel is so good in getting information and preempting suicide bombing, kidnapping attempts, but not now? right when a whole neighborhood got, a Mizrahi neighborhood got expulsion demolition orders, and the developers are friends of some of the ministers who are for privatization, deregulation. And there were planned budget cuts of 1.5 billion shekels, mainly from non-military budgeted issues. So I want to go back, rather than just discussing current events, to the root of it, and that might shed light on the fact that the Israelis were wrapping themselves in flag nowadays and shouting death to the Arabs, in a sense, are also talking about deeper wounds of inter-Jewish racism from the Ashkenazim, who have the privilege to be universalists and talk about how horrendous this Gaza carnage is, while they know that their participation in the occupation is pretty much safe because the Mizrahi majority will continue to vote for the right-wing party. So let me look for the pages. I marked them and so basically I went during Lebanon 2006. I had a deadline. I was invited to write about Zionism, imperialism, and colonialism for the Encyclopedia of Women in Muslim Cultures. And I figured out, if I'm just going to write about the binary Israel-Palestine, it's like repeat, repeat, repeat. I needed to write a historical, cultural piece, so I said I'm going to write about the history of Mizrahi or Sephardic women during the issue or the settlement or the colonization of Palestine by the Ashkenazi Zionists. And Achoti, which is the movement I helped co-found and co-direct until I left Israel in 2007, has a big hub in Mitzvah Ramon. No wonder that the women from Mitzvah Ramon started this march from Jerusalem. So I stayed with a single mother, and one evening, and her nickname that I gave her is Sigal, she turned to me and asked, "How goes the writing?" That's of the encyclopedia entry. "Almost done. Thank God for the quiet of the library and your generous hospitality. Just you wait, I'll return the favor. I'll need to shop for clothes in Tel Aviv for Rosh Hashanah. Anyway, what are you writing about?" The history of Mizrahi women in Palestine during the issue. Issue, or settlement in Hebrew, was first used in the 1880s to refer to the period of the Ashkenazi settlement of Palestine between 1882 and 1948. It's for an encyclopedia on women in Muslim cultures, I added. Muslim cultures? Another woman blurted out. Do Muslims have culture? Why would they care about Jews? Asked another. And why Palestine? Exclaimed the third. It's Israel. Why don't you read for us at the end of Tisha B'Av, suggested Sigal. We'll have a potluck and you can lecture. Tisha B'Av is the annual fast day commemorating the destruction of both the first and second temple of Jerusalem. It is a national holiday and a day of fasting. So we gathered in her place and I read the thing, and I was very nervous because I was like reading, the text was in English, I was reading in Hebrew, and these are women who vote for the right wing, and they have good reasons to vote for the right wing. And I'm not a Zionist, even though when you work in Mizrahi feminism, you need to kind of like build bridges. Most of the activists are either socialist Zionists or post-Zionists or anti-Zionists. Most of the women that we want to empower come from the right wing. So these are the responses after the reading. And the short for the Encyclopedia of Women in Islamic Cultures is Ewik. When I finished reading the Ewik entry, no one talked. only the twirl of the fan blades. I felt the women's gaze on me. There were no pages to retreat behind. Unlike the scholar who would read the encyclopedia entry, my audience on this night was staring me in the face. As I translated the text for them, I skipped the portions that they already knew, such as information on the specifics on the kidnapping of Mizrahi babies sold for adoption. The women probably know more about these than I did. The content that they did not know so well, and what the women thought of it, was what caused me to tremble. Averting my eyes, I stared at the half-moon knifing through the open balcony doors, still anxious and without the post-performance glow. Throughout the talk, the women freely interjected Israel every time I mentioned Palestine. They sparked up arguments to protest or support points I raised, using examples from their own lives. To my surprise, my advocate was Ludmila. Ludmila was a post-Soviet who was sent in the 90s to Mitzvah Ramon. Let her talk, she shushed in her Slavic accent of Hebrew. But now, silence. Luna arrived from the kitchen with cold diet Sprite. As she passed out plastic cups, she muttered, I don't believe any of it. Can't be that bad. Ashkenazim and us, we're all Jews with warm Jewish hearts. Going, the rest of them. Iris louder. Yes, it's that bad. It's worse even. They planned it. They ran like clockwork. These Europeans, so-called and calculated, Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim is bigoted Israeli slang combining Ashkenazim and Nazis. Iris pronounced it slowly, every syllable a hammerstroke. Troublemakers in Europe, back then. Troublemakers here, right now. How dare you! Don't touch my Shoah! Exclaimed Ludmila. What chutzpah! Were your parents in the camps? She paused. Partisans? She needed. Silence again. Their model is not German. They're socialists, Bolsheviks, Stalinist mentality, Ludmila hissed. I believe everything the professor said because it's just like the Soviet mind, and because my husband told me how every morning she would bring bags of books and papers to write up her research. 4 desks full. All in Hebrew and published here. That's how you know it's the truth. Ludmila took another pause, suddenly aware of her gushing. The fans rumbled. Jews need to stop being victims. In the Middle East, it's the law of the jungle. All of us here accept it. You don't. She turned to me and pointed. But that's nature. The Jews' right to survive in the jungle. When in war, act like it's war. Or tell. These Ashkenazi leftists raise their self-esteem saying, I'm helping the weak. I'm loving the Aravim. Aravim is Arabs in plural in Hebrew. I'm generous. I'm wonderful. What an ego trip. But what about us? Why do they hate us? They hate us, all right, but advanced us, said Sigal. We're no longer Aravim. We no longer they. No killing daughters for honor. Our men no longer marry several wives. Thank God we live in a Jewish state. So what if the Ashkenazim burst it? Iris. Yes, they hate us because we vote Likud. Of course we vote for the right. They didn't do these crimes to us. She's referring to all of the rights crimes that the Ashkenazim did to the Mizrahim, as they quote-unquote absorbed them from 1882 on. It was a Labour Party and the rest of them left. That's what she lectured about. Likud screwed with us too, said Sigal, but we must support them. They're not wishy-washy with peace mumbo-jumbo. Look here. When the left is in power, there are wars with the Arabim. 48, 56, 73. Even now with Flora's brother, there was Amir Peretz, and he ran the Lebanon War. 2006, and that was when Labour was in power. He's Labour. With Likud on the right, there's quiet. The Arabim are afraid to come out of their cubbyholes. The right doesn't talk peace. They're honest. When in war, act like it's war. And again, we didn't travel as far as this Gaza carnage to the foreign press. Is it basically Bibi felt like the war was superimposed on it? Mainly it was Bennett from the Jewish House and Lieberman who pushed Bibi towards the war. Not that I like Bibi, but Bennett is a graduate of this very elite unit, Sayeret Matkal, the same ones who did Entebbe. And he grew up in the Socialist National Religious Party, the one who took the ethos of the kibbutz and planted it to the West Bank. So he is not pure right-wing, as far as he has his roots in some sort of socialist religious Judaism, even though he is one of the forces now behind the budget cuts, the privatization, deregulation, and the preempting of the social progress. You want to hear another piece of the book, or shall we open it for discussion? What? More. So let me read you a little bit about myself and my life as a social welfare mama. They used to call me on Israeli TV the unemployed Berkeley professor, and one of the leaders of the feminist of color movement in Israel or Palestine. So you can understand what these women were marching against. But then, of course, one people, one heart, end of the social protest. 12 August 2003. Shaheen and I entered the cafeteria of the Human Humanities building at Tel Aviv University. We needed to kill an hour before Shaheen's cello lesson at the Music Academy. We opened the door, and the thick, perpetual cigarette haze hit us. So we headed straight for the area cordoned off for university professors. Willful trespassers, we were content to illicitly enjoy the smoke-free, air-conditioned zone. Vicky and Ilana, these are the two mothers who led the protest, would never have sought relief from the sizzling summer in a faculty club. The privilege of my Berkeley PhD gave me the chutzpah to transgress into this space. We sat at the table in the center of the section, surrendering ourselves to the dense cloud of L'Eau d'ici summer and Yves Saint Laurent opium. The bouquet brought me back to the forbidden land of the Ben Gurion airport duty-free shop. I was stranded in Israel with a stop-exit order for 9 years. The room was strewn with bold, pot-bellied professors in Bermuda shorts, tight Al Cheapo t-shirts, and Birkenstock-style sandals. The professors chatted with faculty wives and female professors with coiffed hair, dyed and highlighted in copper shades, and with collagen-enhanced faces recommended by Dorit Landes, the celebrity high-end cosmetic guru of Yapi Haaretz. The women sported chic garb with lace, zippers, and knotted fabric, often all in one piece. From my window shopping in White City, Tel Aviv is literally divided to White City, where the Ashkenazim live, and Black City, which is the ghetto or the barrio where the Mizrahim live. I recognize the clothes as designer labels from Upper Dizengoff Boulevard boutiques. In such a space, where no one tells Mizrahim that they are not welcome, but they know it, almost everyone craned their necks and winced at our presence, all at once. Was it because they didn't expect darkies in their Ashkenazi space, let alone with a cello? Or did they identify Shaheen, and rightly so, as a scholarship kid from the barrio competing with their children? Like a pair of Pavlov's dogs, Shaheen and I switched to speaking English. The profs seemed to let down their territorial guard. Perhaps our carefree accents made us sound like hip Californians, but us, in the Bay Area, One sentence would suffice to peg us as native Hebrew speakers. We had arrived at Gilman after 5 hours of standing in lines. That morning, we had gone to get my unemployment card stamped by a placement clerk at the Employment Bureau. The regime requires every disenfranchised single mother in Israel, myself included, to obtain a stamp as permission to receive a welfare check. Once a month, every month, these single mothers from the slums pack themselves and their children into crowded buses to city centers. There is no affordable childcare, and the regime forbids welfare mothers from owning cars, even run-down jalopies, no exceptions. At the Employment Bureau, mothers, clutching their children's hands tightly, dash inside and pounce upon ticket dispensers hung at European height. The higher the ticket number, the longer the wait. There are waiting areas, each with less than a dozen seats, but often there are more than 4 dozen mothers waiting in front of each office. In the lines, amorphous throngs, mothers and children strain to hear placement clerks bark their numbers. Guards, handcuffs and batons dangling from their belts, pistols stowed in their holsters, stand ready to strike in case of a ruckus. When a mother hears her number, she enters the placement clerk's office. About 50% of the time, the placement clerk hands the mother a printout of a job opening along with directions to the interview. These are jobs like changing diapers for the elderly in nursing homes or at-home cooking for disabled people. In Israel, these jobs require no special skills or degrees. The mother then goes to her prospective employer with her children on the bus. She does the interview, God forbid if she misses it. If she does, no welfare. Never mind that the employer is certain to reject her for the position. Guest workers from Bulgaria, the Philippines, and Kerala have much lower employer costs. Interview complete, the employer is supposed to report that the mother showed up and was rejected. At times, the employer, a man by default, may ask the mother to leave her children and follow him to the back of his office. She would know the offer he would make. His report back to the Employment Bureau in exchange for a blowjob. After the interview, the mother returns to the Employment Bureau with her children on the bus. Upon arrival, she gets in line. Again, she takes a number. She waits to hear her number called. Only when in front of the placement clerk for a second time does she get her stamp. But even at this late stage, she cannot relax. So near to attaining her goal, the mother is more likely to succumb to a placement clerk's demand for sexual favors in exchange for the stamp. Finally, stamp in hand, she can travel to the NSB to obtain her welfare check. And still one more hurdle. If she opens a bank account to deposit this loan check, she pays about 25% of the amount in fees and commissions. More likely, she cashes the check at the bank, pushes the wad of bills into her bra, goes straight home, wraps the money in plastic, and stuffs it into the gut of the lone chicken in the freezer. This was the norm until 1st of April 2003. Just as single mothers had gotten used to this routine, the Knesset ordered the Finance Ministry to halve the number of placement clerks. At the same time, the regime required that mothers of children as young as 2.5 get the stamp from the Employment Bureau. Previously, the law only applies to mothers of children aged 5 and up, so applicants more than doubled and only half the clerks were available to service them. Employment bureaus swelled with tangled strollers and crushed feet, the howls of toddlers, rattling toys, pungent diapers, Gerber's mashed pumpkin, and the mother's sour sweat. No participant observation for the anthropologist. I waited in those lines to hear my own number called. In my right pocket my Tehillah. In my left, a small red granite stone from South Sinai Nakab Shaheen, the majestic mountain pass where Shaheens or royal falcons once lived. The pass crossed the red, craggy cliffs that plummet into the blue depths of the Aqaba Gulf north of Dahab, my second home and long-term ethnographic field site. In my youth, when Nakab Shaheen was still pristine, before mass tourism descended upon it, I would retreat there to reflect and write my field notes. There, I dreamed of having a child as fierce and smart as the Falcons. The appointments with my placement clerk are always short and to the point. Lucky me, I had been assigned a woman in 2001. Over the last 2 years, we had developed a good rapport. You aren't eligible for the Wisconsin, she announced. Too old. For disenfranchised Israelis, Ha-Wisconsin, which is the Wisconsin in Hebrew, does not refer to the name of the U.S. state of Wisconsin. It is a program and a nightmare. This welfare to work initiative, expanded, by the way, in the last vote for Cork, as Israel was united behind the attack on Gaza. So this welfare to work initiative originated in the U.S. state of Wisconsin. Dubbed Mehalev, or from the heart, by the regime, it combines privatization of state-run programs with drastic cuts in welfare. The elderly, physically disabled, and yes, single mothers are directly targeted. The regime requires welfare recipients to go to employment bureaus for 30 to 40 hours a week to receive counseling, training, and job referrals. Individuals who still cannot find jobs are then conscripted into unpaid work, painting schools, or mowing public lawns. Only at the end of this process does a person receive welfare benefits. Overqualified, she declared, in a Sabra Hebrew accent, using the English for a lack of the Hebrew one. Her voice was somber, but I didn't have the energy to hypothesize if this was sympathy for my plight or disappointment that she wouldn't get her bonus for placing yet another single mother in the Wisconsin. Whatever. My heartbeat slowed down as my skin cooled in her air-conditioned office. Go to the Sozialit, she sighed. Sozialit in Hebrew for social worker, case officer. She'll try to slide you into the committee for exceptional cases. Maybe they have a solution for a professor on class welfare. From March to June, I taught at the MA program at the Israeli branch of Lesley University and at Beit Burrell Teachers College. I worked 6 classes hours a week and was paid by the hour. On average, I was making 1,200 new Israeli shekels, which is around $276 a month. I was entitled to income augmentation of 447, or about 100 new NIS, which is about $103 from the NSP, in order for me to reach half the minimum wage. The augmentation required that I go to the placement center in vain to seek additional jobs. At the end of every semester, I was laid off. Hourly workers are not entitled to unemployment benefits, so I needed to go to the Employment Bureau to get the unemployment stamp for the NSB full-size income assurance, once again, half the minimum wage. Shaheen and I fried in the sun as we dragged ourselves from the Employment Bureau to the NSB, with his cello on the bus. Before we even stepped inside, we waited in a line 78 people long to get through the security checkpoint. Once through the door, we joined another line of 213 people, all waiting to be sorted by a clerk into the right offices. After I was sorted, a clerk sent us to wait in one last line, some 155 people long. We stood the entire time. Finally, I could speak to someone about my problem. I was to receive 447 NIS, or about $103 income augmentation for June. This was apart from anything I was owed for July and August. My application for full income assurance had not kicked in yet. I wanted someone to explain why I only received 401 NIS, or about $92, for my June income augmentation. The printout in my hands showed that I should have gotten 447. How did the state expect a mother to provide for her son and herself on 401 NIS? Lucky for us, an anonymous donor saw the unemployed single mother Berkeley professor advocating Mizrahi feminism on primetime TV and paid our rent. For my middle-class American colleagues, a TV appearance is an act of agency, but for me, divinity of chance, for 1 month's rent. But what about my missing income augmentation? Would luck be on my side? No. I found out that the missing money was because of a new amendment to Cork. This law cut the income augmentation for single mothers who dared to work. If a single mother didn't work, her income assurance was left intact and made her an excellent candidate for the Wisconsin. Shaheen and I calculated our financial world in increments of milk bags. The weekly food donation from Operation Open Heart did not include milk, so we bought milk at the store, and 46 NIS meant 9 bags, or about 36 cups of milk. Every summer, I take my son to bear these lines. It is vital to me that he sees this process. A dark child with no trust fund and no one to pull strings for him to get ahead, he must understand the Mizrahi struggle firsthand to survive. Shaheen and I were trespassers across the Gilman border because of her skin. In the lines, we don't cross any race or gender border. Most of the humiliated mothers in this line are Mizrahi. The humiliators are also Mizrahi. Low-level welfare clerks and single mothers caught up in the state's welfare bureaucracy. No need for English. I can comfortably speak in Tel Aviv slang. An extra bonus is practicing our Arabic with the muhajjabat, or veiled women, from Jaffa in the next one. Now I'd like to open this for discussion so we can relate all of these issues to the ruthless reasons for Israel to conduct this Gaza warfare now, in the sun, so that people don't protest this kind of conditions that I laid out in my reading. Do you have any questions, comments?
What's driving the social welfare cuts? What?
Privatization and deregulation, and the understanding that no matter what, the Mizrahim are loyal to the state because they are there to protect the scraps that they get from the state. And their only avenues for upward mobility is military service, which is out of fashion with many Ashkenazim nowadays, police, security forces, green berets, or blue-collar labor. And the cuts go to the elite, as Linda Efroni said. In 2003, they gave these cuts as a tax refund. They saved 5 billion shekels, and they gave it as a tax refund to the upper echelons.
So it's exactly what happens in, most Western countries. It's the same process.
Yes, it's just that you do have protests, like in Greece, even Gaza Square in Turkey. In Israel, to preempt the protest, the Palestinians will pay the price.
Yeah.
You start a war, and as they say, I forgot to read you this thing, another thing about the going. It's us, the last frontier of Jewish resistance. First, with all due respect to Gideon Lavie, I cannot be compared to him. He's Ashkenazi, he is upper class, and he's being touted oftentimes as one of us, like rational, sympathetic to the Palestine cause Israelis. And he is a sort of a celebrity of the Ashkenazi elite because he gives them a saving grace. Also Amira Haas, but Amira Haas takes even she does take a greater risk. She lives in Iran. But they are like the saving grace of the liberal, socialist, progressive Zionists who are of the Ashkenazi elite. Mizrahim, who are with an anti-Zionist position, pay a much higher price. You can look at the completely unmeasured punishment that Mordecai Vanunu got for revealing Israel's nuclear secrets, which were not exactly secretive, right? You can look at the very high price that Tali Fahima paid. She was a human shield for Zacharias Bedi from the Jenin guerrillas and the Freedom Theater of Ornamar. She just explained in maps, which are not classified maps, right? The biggest fear of the regime has always been a coalition between the Mizrahim and the Palestinians and the rest of the Arab world. That's why when Mizrahim went through a downward mobility upon arrival in the 50s, they made Mizrahim hate the Arab in themselves. And the left, though, controlled, it's still in control of universities, of the courts. When I went to college, on every Mizrahi there were 8 Ashkenazim. Now on every Mizrahi there are 4 Ashkenazim. And almost all the elite jobs in Israel are Ashkenazi, to the fact that last week the education ministry came with a back to school campaign. And all the kids in the campaign who were, they were the successful kids. They looked like Scandinavians. Even Ashkenazi Jews don't look like that. So the racism in Israel is so deep. So if you're a Mizrahi, not that I want to compare myself to Vanunu or Tali Fahima, but what they don't like is Mizrahim with good English. Because I write in the book about the translation block, that they keep information such as the information that I relate to you from traveling to the English circuits, so you all can think very simplistically. They're Israelis and they're Palestinians, and they are at war with each other. Not thinking about the cultural capital that the leftist Ashkenazi Zionists get when they come here and shed crocodile tears for Palestine, knowing that nothing at home is going to change. They will enjoy the fruits of the occupation because the Mizrahi majority will vote for the right wing. Because the right wing was an underdog when the racial hierarchies of Israel were being formed. Now, as for my story, I had a very acrimonious divorce in the United States. And my son and I basically needed to flee domestic violence, which was not treated by the California family courts. So I abducted my son. And I took him to Israel knowing that international law was on my side, because we were in an endangered life situation. However, Israel follows dutifully the Hague Convention, and it returns mother and children sometimes to their death, particularly into client states like the United States. So I had a very complicated legal proceeding, at the end of which I was cleared of all accusation by the U.S. federal law, the Hague, and Israeli family law. However, when you have a Hague proceeding, they take your passport. So they took my American and Israeli passport and my son's. When the Hague proceeding was over, the Americans immediately gave me my passport. Not only that, they threw a party for me. And the consul told me, were I like you, I would have done the same thing. The Israelis, however, did not give me my Israeli passport. And as a dual citizen, I had to go into and out of Israel on my Israeli passport. So they told me, you're stranded. You're here. In order to get your Israeli passport and get out of the country, you will need to apply for Israeli custody. We're not going to give it to you, and we're not, so that you can leave, and we're not going to give it to you so you can appeal. So I was in limbo. The limbo was forced on me because Israeli family law is not harmonized with international family law. And this is the case to prevent Palestinian family unification. So even though I'm Jewish and with privilege, they use their disharmony of family law, which is done to prevent Palestinian families for unification, against me. So I was free of child abduction charges. I was completely clear. But they wouldn't give me my passport. And for 5 more years, I had to go to court and go to court and go to court, and I was at that point under the jurisdiction of the Israeli court. I had custody in California, but I could not leave the country. And that was because there is a revolving door in Israel between the academe and the regime. You can see it like professors of law become judges, judges become professors of law, Israeli academics consult for the security forces, some of Israeli academics get 2 salaries, one of them, like the guy who, the Hudna was his brainchild, he was consulting using the Hudna, which was a ceasefire between the tribe of Quraysh and other tribes in in Arabia during the time of Prophet Muhammad, in a completely Orientalist way, to kind of like cut and paste it to the Hamas, because the Hamas is a religious organization or a guerrilla movement and then a sovereign state element, right? So, because of that revolving door, they wanted me in Israel, jobless, so that I could not finish my research. When my son was born, I shifted. I thought, I'm not going to take him to the Sinai because of medical health, etc., when he was a baby. So I shifted, and I already had tenure, because usually it's not advisable to work on Palestine and Israel before you have tenure, particularly in the American academic setting. So I had tenure, and I said, I'm going to follow my heart, and I'm going to start a project on intra-Jewish racism. That was the first project that actually dealt with field data, like testimonies, participant observation, not something that analyzes poetry or prose or movies, but juxtaposing that together with real life, in a sense. And they wanted to stop it. So they used my custody and the fact that I fled to Israel, even though I was clean by international law, to strand me in. So I had to stay sane. So I joined efforts to build Israel's feminist of color movement. And that's where I learned that there are good enough reasons for the majority of Israelis to vote for the right and not for the left. And the tragedy is that we are marching toward a one-state solution. And in that one-state solution, the Mizrahim, the Jews will be a minority. And the times for secular one state, I think, are gone. Because Israel is very good in missing opportunities. There are about 1 million Ashkenazim equipped with European Union passports. They're going to leave. The Mizrahim are going to stay. And they're going to have a very big adjustment to stay in Palestine or Palestine-Israel when it becomes one state. Because of the Ashkenazi elite, they always say, they kind of say, we're going to make more peace negotiation. So there is a quiet period in which social protest develops. They're afraid of the social protest, they start another war. And then they sign another truce. And there is another period of quiet. So all of the pressure cooker between the Mizrahi majority and Ashkenazi minority are about to blow up. And they start another war. If that's not enough, they'll get everyone united against the Iranian nuclear threat. Have you heard recently about the Iranian nuclear threat? No, we have Daesh, or ISIS, which is a pocket that started by Obama and the Israeli think tank neoliberal kind of support of this kind of radical Islam. So the Iranian threat is gone. But for a while, there was a way to squelch social protest, and don't forget that the Iranians have nuclear arms. But now that Iran and the US are going towards a rapprochement, Gaza has to happen. And the Israeli news is either they have negotiated with the Hamas, and actually the news said that Bibi already had the agreement that he was going to offer to Hamas before the war, but he needed the war. And there is ISIS. Until the next bloodletting cycle. So I hope I answered your question in this kind of way.
When you say international protests like here, what we're doing today, does it have an effect over there to help the people in Gaza?
Yes. Israelis are completely hysterical by the boycott. Particularly the high-tech, biotech, and academia. Because they like to say, okay, you see, we're human, we're for peace, we're talking in these universalist values. We have these Mizrahim, these flag rappers, and look what we have to deal with. These are Arab Jews, they're primitive, they don't have the values of democracy rehearsed against them. And you're going to boycott us? So it's very effective. Because all of these, we call them in Hebrew beautiful souls. There are three things they don't talk about. And they're not allowed to talk about if they want to come here and not have problems in Israel. The boycott, or the BDS, one state, and most importantly, the right of return. That's humble. Because you see, whenever you have a colonial project or an imperialist project, and where you have two nations clashing, you always have the race factor. And you need to squelch the race factor for national unity. Look at South Africa's colored and the whites vis-a-vis the blacks. And look at the way that they try to divide between the different black tribes. Look at the United States. And you had the blacks, the Asians, the Latinos, and the Cold War, say. So whenever you have a colonial imperialist project, you must assume also that within it you have racial divisions. And you always need to mend the seams. It's about to blow up, and you mend the seam. Look about the Black Panthers in Vietnam and the way that these go together, right? So you cannot think of one without the other. And to my mind, the mistake of many Palestine activists in the West is that they just think about Israel-Palestine or Israel, the Arab world. And you cannot think about Israel and Zionism without thinking about inter-Jewish racism and the way that it fuels atrocities against non-Jews. I write about it in my book. The majority of settlers are Mizrahim. And we call it the Mizrahi transfer from pre-67 Israel. And the logic goes as follows. And I'll give you the logic, say, of the 2011 occupied, okay? There are all these Ashkenazi kids. In the past, the parents had enough money to give them the seed money or the down payment to buy property within what we call the Gedera line, or where you have most of the employment in Israel, which is 25 or 30 kilometers north of Tel Aviv, 30 kilometers south of Tel Aviv. Jerusalem is in that pocket. Well, Jerusalem is in the margin, and on the whole, it's a very poor city. So the parents can no longer help their kids buy in Tel Aviv proper. The kids want to live in Tel Aviv. It's a chic city, right? It's like Berlin, it's like London. It's a very cosmopolitan city. They're outside of their departments. They go and demonstrate. This has a chain reaction, because for Mizrahim, it used to be to leave the slums and the ghettos of Tel Aviv. They moved to satellite cities like Rishon LeZion, like Rehovot, like Hedera. Nowadays, Mizrahim cannot help their kids buy or enter the housing market in these satellite cities at the margins of the Hedera-Gedera line. So what do? The Ashkenazi parents, to help their kids enter when they marry the housing market, they will buy out the Mizrahim in Rishon LeZion, Hedera, Gedera, Rehovot, etc. The Mizrahim will sell because they gathered equity, a lot of equity. They will sell their apartments, and then they will divide the money between their children. They have larger families. And then everyone will go to the big settlements, like the ones I showed in the slide, Pisgat Ze'ev, or like Ariel. So there is always a movement of Mizrahim from the margins of Hedera Gedera and from the ghettos and the barrios to the settlements. What do you get in the settlement? You get your refrigerator and washing machine working together without a short. You get better schools. You get more mammogram machines. You get better health services. You get better personal security because the settlements are so patrolled. And then you want to work. You have this 24/7 van service on the apartheid roads for Jews only, from the settlements to the work inside the green line and back to the settlement. So if you're a Mizrahi and you got your life improved in the settlements, are you going to give it up? No. If you're an Ashkenazi, are you going to send your kids to the settlements? Or are you going to say, okay, the settlements are terrible. I'm going to buy out the Mizrahi family who needs to help their kid settle down. So my kids are not going to live in Tel Aviv. Yeah, it's very upsetting. Tel Aviv is cool. They're going to live in Rishon LeZion. So I'll have a better train service and public transport between Rishon LeZion and Tel Aviv, so they can go to the clubs and the cafes and the movie house and the avant-garde scene and the theaters, etc. And the Mizrahim will take the apartheid road. So it's kind of like a domino effect. And the Mizrahim are not going to vote against their housing. But what they say, and I quote it in the book, and they're very correct, it's the Ashkenazi socialist left who started the settlement project. The Likud just went and continued it. And they started it again in order to create this pocket in the center of Israel, which is the enlightened pocket of Ashkenazi only, with this kind of universalist values. And then people get very upset when Mizrahim come from the settlements or from the hoods, wrapped in the flag and with chains, and everyone who speaks against the war, they beat the shit out of them. And in a sense, it's not only fascism, but it's also crying over the race crimes that were done along generations. Again, the people who pay the price at the end are the Palestinians, because this anti-war protest is very ineffective. It relies on the fact that the majority will continue to vote for the right wing, and the occupation money machine will continue to work. The United States.
The United States.
We are the 51st star.
Right.
That's how Israelis see themselves.
But in the sense, because Jews that came from the Arab world, do they look back to the Arab world for their cultural roots, or?
That's the success of the Israeli education system. From kindergarten until you are 18, it is being rehearsed to you that you are the chosen people. You are the villa in the jungle. You are the advanced. You are the light to all nations. You are the chosen people who came back to their chosen land. So, in a sense, if the regime throws you scraps of it, you will hang on to it. So, many Mizrahim see this kind of European or Euro-American inclination of the Ashkenazim towards peace as white privilege. It's parcel of what comes with white privilege. That you can allow yourself to be a universalist because you are distanced from the Arabs. You don't have an Arabic last name lurking there. You don't have an Arabic phenotype that you need to bleach with. There are ointments that people like my color buy to kind of like get less pigmentation. You don't need to do that. You don't need to de-accent or worry about accent slippage, so you speak with the Tabra Ra rather than the Semitic Ra when you speak Hebrew. So, in a sense, it's a white privilege in Israel to be pro-Palestinian. And that's the tragedy of it, because it's a fake privilege. It makes you look like you're a universalist, but you know that nothing is going to change because you're a minority. You look well in Europe, you look well in the United States, while the Mizrahi majority keeps voting for the right. So you can keep your white privileges. International pressure, on the one hand. And on the other hand, as difficult as it is my hope that Palestine activists realize that they need to talk to the Mizrahi leadership, because the Mizrahi community, grassroots leadership, most of them, when they understand what Zionism is, they're not Zionists. But they cannot go to the community with an anti-Zionist agenda. However, Mizrahi leadership does have constituencies. The Ashkenazi anti-Zionists, usually they don't have constituencies within Israel. So they're kind of like, with all due respect to their courage, they're voices that speak to a void, or they usually speak outside in English to the Palestine camp. Mizrahi grassroots activists, like the leadership of the Black Panthers or the leadership of Mizrahi feminism, understand Palestine and does work with its communities. So it is my hope that there is some sort of bond or connection or communication between Palestine activists and Mizrahi communities.
And how best can we achieve that communication, do you think?
You're a living example. Jim was the first pro-Palestine person who entered into the home of a very right-wing Likudnik by the name of Aaron Madwal, who was a leader of a neighborhood destined for demolition called Kfar Shalem, which sits on where Salome, the Palestinian village, used to be. And now the land has gained value. There are development plans to build high-rises. And as we sit here and speak, today is Shabbat, but starting tomorrow and last week, there are expulsion demolition orders on Kfar Shalem. Jim's visit, and Jim and Penny and I got there just by circumstance or by serendipity, led to a whole sequence of activities that made the people of Kfar Shalem, who are Mizrahi and right-wing, go in coalition with the Communist Party to the city of Tel Aviv. And therefore brought the international solidarity movement troops from the West Bank to be human shields for Kfar Shalem. Because Jim didn't bite Aaron, and they actually share a language of people who live on the land in single-family dwelling and like the space that they live in. Aaron later on was agreeable to accept other delegations who come usually just to visit Palestinian refugee camps and so forth. In the Mizrahi camp, we call them depression tours. These are like the fact-finding tours. I mean, we are very ironic about it, of people who come to see the horrendous occupation and the sociocide that is going on in the West Bank. Before that, Kfar Shalem said, no, this is against Israel, we're not going to do that. That started the ball rolling, and instead of each family fighting for their plot of land, they started seeing their issue as a human rights issue. And they went to some of the best human rights attorneys, and they got attorneys from IHAD, or the Israeli Association Against House Demolition, the one that Jeff Halper heads. And again, these people are very radical as far as their anti-Zionist politics, but they support the Likud, which is one of the antinomies of the Mizrahi predicament in Israel. So on the one hand, they're with the communists, on the other hand, they're pro-Israel fascists. Unfortunately, because there was not enough ongoing international support, rather than going with the United Nations and declaring themselves internal refugees, which would have been a big media attraction, they decided to go and have the Knesset declare a law to protect them as Kfar Shalem residents. The laws never went into effect. Their houses are being demolished. They don't want to launder Israel's dirty linen in the public. But my hunch is that if there was an ongoing contact, like if I wouldn't have left to get a job and go back to the United States, because I was one of the people who created that kind of link, maybe Kfar Shalem would have been a turning point in the trying to join the Mizrahi and Palestinian struggle. But as is, the state threw you some bones and you hold on to it because you have nothing else to replace it with. The replacement the Ashkenazim have is a European Union passport, and knowing that when the place falls apart, they can go to Europe. The Mizrahim are not going to go back to Yemen or to Iraq or to Tunisia and so on and so forth. They will stay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a few significant questions. You mentioned human rights here, and like there was a total lack of human rights on different levels. For example, where they divorce, where marriage and divorce, law of family law is concerned. Well, I saw a program on the Irish language television about these Jewish women that went into divorce court, and their husbands got custody because their husbands were going to send the children to another quarters of school, and they got no say in the matter at all, and so on. Now, is there any movement in Israel for a human rights campaign or a civil rights campaign? And then, as well as that, linked to that, I would like to ask you that how strong is the grassroots movement in the Mizrahi side, and how strong is it in the other side, in the white Jewish people, the upper class, more upper class people? Is there any grounds for a civil rights movement there?
While Smadar thinks about her answer to that, can I just have a commercial break a moment? We have to pay for the hire of this room, so I'm going to pass around this. I think it's too small, but I'm going to pass around this container, and if you can consider the container to that. So meanwhile, keep the rattle of money to a minimum, and Smadar will answer those questions.
Yeah, and I'd like to end with a short piece from the book. Human rights is an industry, unfortunately now, and it's a good way for many of the Ashkenazi NGOs. In the book, I talk about the division of labor between different rights organizations, what the Palestinians can do as far as human rights, or what the Ashkenazim would allow them to do, what the Ashkenazim would allow the Mizrahim to do, and what the Ashkenazim do themselves for human rights. So everything is safe and everyone knows their place. Many Mizrahim have problems with the notion of human rights because of the way that there is like an industry of NGOs and many social movements. With the shrinking of the welfare state, many social movements, they went through a process of NGOization. And then you need to speak in two languages. You need to speak in the language of the funders. And Mizrahim will not get money unless they speak in the language of soup kitchens. Nothing about racism. Because how can Jews be racist to other Jews, right? Palestinians cannot speak about the Mizrahi-Ashkenazi divide because they're expected to sing in chorus the nationalistic song. If they speak about religion, like Hamas, I don't like Hamas, but Hamas is the elected government of the Palestinians. And the elections were done with US supervision, right? So if Palestinians don't sing the national song, they will not get human rights money. And Ramallah is full of this kind of NGOs that don't have constituencies. Because as much as the Israelis went to the religious right, so did the Palestinians went to the Islamists. Kind of like Islamist, neocon kind of model. So I have a problem with this whole notion of rights, given the way that rights have replaced justice. So I'm all for grassroots organization, and if human rights were an autochthonous, like indigenous concept, I would have been for it. But nowadays, it has become more of an employer than a liberation struggle. I hope I'm making sense to you?
Yeah, thank you.
Can I end with the short piece I forgot to read? Is that okay with you? And that's after the talk that I read the encyclopedia entry about Zionism, colonialism, imperialism, and women, Sephardic and Mizrahi women during the period of the settlement of Palestine by the Ashkenazi Zionists. So after the talk, Sigal and I helped Luna gather her dishes from the table. We then walked back to her apartment. We chose a scenic route along the promenade on the edge of the cirque. Mitzpe Ramon sits on the world's largest natural cirque. We ambled, tired from the fast, the large meal, and the arguments. The lopsided moon's rays lit the craggy cliffs above the plateau, but left the cirque searing depth in thick darkness. The crisp and cool desert breeze came from the north and caressed our southbound decks. Sigal and I said nothing to each other. The sustained silence between us implied neither a deep bond of friendship nor absolute strangehood. Were we still sisters to the struggle? Did she and the others think I was one of those Ashkenazi leftists? Would they abandon Ahoti in our future projects? Would it be my fault? Without warning, Sigal blurted out, "Why do you speak in favor of the Arabim? It's over with. Do you really love them? When the time comes and they slaughter us, you won't get a pass because you call yourself an Arab Jew and think you're one of them. They are the enemy. God bless Mitzvah, far away from the Qassam missiles in Gaza, let alone Hezbollah's Katyushas from Lebanon. You know, the missiles can't reach Tel Aviv, where you and the Shishi sisters live, but Hamas and Hezbollah won't dare attack." That's 2006. He changed. She forced a chuckle. "Suicide bombers don't come to Mitzvah," she continued. "Too piddly. The media won't come this far to cover them. News has to be within an hour's drive. 2 hours max." I paused before answering. I didn't want to start an argument. After all, she was my host. "I really don't know. I think we can't separate the Mizrahim from the Palestinians." "Sure we can," she shot back. "We are Jews. They're going."
Thank you.